Do more, be better. The podcast where we explore the intersection of business, technology, and personal growth and how they shape our lives, families, and careers. Every week, we dive into the stories of entrepreneurs and innovators who are redefining what it means to achieve professional success while maintaining personal fulfillment. Welcome. Let's get into it. Amy is the CEO of Avenue Talent Partners, an executive search firm for startups. She is one of the most thoughtful people I know, and I'm really excited to have her on the show today and get her thoughts on a range of topics. Can you say hello to everybody?
Hi, Sal. Thanks for having me. Thank you for the nice words, too. I did not pay you to say that, and you just touched my soul, so thank you.
Well, I mean it. Every time you and I chat, I go into a rabbit hole that always comes out with interesting stuff. So,
Same.
and
Same.
I've been joking around that like this podcast for me is tilting at windmills, right? A little Don Quixote-ish, and it really is that. I just like having conversations, and it brings back being in college where I was a broadcast journalism major and doing interviews. And it's funny, you're lucky. You're like number 6, I think I've done now. So you're getting a more like refined version of Sal, right? I look back on him because I've been listening to him, and I'm like, oh, I could have done that a lot better,
You
right?
found your sea legs. I'm here for this.
Yeah.
Look, practice makes perfect.
It is. And it's just a better conversation when everybody's a little bit more comfortable. So I'm excited for today. Where I like to start is, well, yes, to some extent, this is a business podcast. We'll talk about business stuff. I always think it's really important to get to know people on not necessarily a personal level, but just a little bit more about who they are beyond the CEO, founder hat, whatever it might be. And so I always like to start these things by asking kind of an easy, but it turns out to be a kind of complicated question, which is, what do you like to do when you're not working?
Well, I will qualify. It depends on the mood and where I am with, but if it's summertime, for example, so like right now, the weather is really lovely here in the Midwest. We don't always get to say that in terms of moderate climate and temperatures. My husband and I have created this I'm a huge nature person. You and I've talked about this behind the scenes. And we've created this little ecosystem in our backyard where we have a whole pond, babbling brook, waterfall kind of scenario. And we are getting so many birds and all sorts of like other little creatures that most people in our neighborhood, most people I talk to don't want. We love it. We feed them all. So we're here for a possum. We're here for a raccoon. We're here for a squirrel. We're here for a bunny. We're here for, although we haven't seen them in a long time, little baby thing called a groundhog. They're so cute. They like melon, by the way. So there's that. Yes, fun fact. So that, I love that. Like just being out there and listening to the water. I'm a water person, so listening to the water and watching birds and hanging with my husband and just kind of chilling is one of my favorite things that I'm doing these days. I'm big into music. I like live music. I like a variety of different kinds of music. I like to shop. So one of the things that I do on the weekends, like one of the weekend days, is I just go away for like 4 hours and I just find myself I grocery shop at 4 different places. So I'm a huge foodie. I like to make food. I like to prepare it. I like to procure it. I like to share it with people. It's kind of one of my love languages. And it's certainly a creative outlet for me because I have no others. And my grocery situation is like 3 to 4 plus grocery stores and a farmer's market. And I talk to people. I like to understand where the food's coming from. I like to share recipe ideas with people. I'm like one of those annoying people at the grocery store that I'll be in a line. It'll be a log line. And I'm looking at somebody's cart. I'm like, what are you going to do with that? And just really inspire some interesting conversations. So those are some of the things that you can find me doing when I'm not working, which is way too much these days. So
I love it. I I love the outdoors and I sort of forget it sometimes. It's interesting, especially living kind of in the Midwest. We actually haven't had the worst winters for the last few years, right? But you tend to spend more time indoors. And it's funny, Pamela, my wife, and I were out in Colorado 2 or 3 years ago and going hiking with our 1-year-old daughter. And she was like, "You were so happy. Why don't you spend more time outside?" And I'm like, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, right? And it is that nature part of your brain that if you don't connect to it, I feel like you lose something. And so I love that you were intentional about finding a way to get that in your little ecosystem, right? Where you can just walk out and you have it right there.
Well, and it's out of my bedroom too. So we have a balcony off of our bedroom that overlooks this backyard. And in the morning, my husband and I like to have tea and just kind of start the day listening. So it's interesting. I don't know if you know, I've talked about this yet, but I am into Reiki. And one of the things that helps when you're in a moment, I mean, it could be an anxious moment, it could be a sad moment, it could be a fearful moment, it could be whatever it is the power of grounding. Like whether you believe in Reiki or not, I'm not here to like try to convert people. And I'm certainly not a Reiki master where I'm doing Reiki on people. But there's something really, really powerful. And this is certainly part of a lot of what I read of if you are stressed, if you are going through something, it's being able to ground yourself. And ideally, if you can, like get your shoes off and put your feet in the grass and just like feel the earth and realize that like you're just a little baby speck when it comes to all of the things around you. And you realize that you really don't have a whole lot of control over a lot of things. And for me, I'm a super control freak. That's actually cathartic. And I just think about like, what can I feel? What can I touch? Feel and touch, I guess those are the same things. What can I hear? What can I see? What can I smell? What can I taste? And it's like just coming back to self of the things around. And especially now, I mean, I'm looking out of my window right now. I have 4 bird feeders in front of my window. So my office, I'm surrounded by all windows. But the songbirds and listening to them and watching them interact and realizing that whatever is happening in my world, good, bad, or indifferent, these birds still wake up at the crack of dawn and they start singing. And before they go to bed at night, they're still singing. And there's something really beautiful about that. And I think I'm really in tune with it now because we have a place up on a lake. And I'm not going to be there for the first time in many, many years this year because we're building a new place. And that usually is when it's the summer, like late spring, summer, early fall. I don't leave there unless it's like an act of Congress because I'm surrounded by major water with a lake, but also so much nature and all of these things. And we intentionally bought this land that we're building on that has wetlands, and all the neighbors around us are like, yeah, so in the middle of the night, because we also bought this land in the most strict township that doesn't let you do anything. I digress. But they're really strict about protecting the lake, which I'm all for. And our neighbors are like, yeah, in the middle of the lake or in the middle of the night or when the season dies down and all the people go away, you can totally take a bulldozer and take all the wetlands down, then you fill it. And as long as you fill it with the tree chips that you took down, I'm like, that's a no for me. And we are intentionally doing this, which is a lot more expensive and a lot more arduous and a big pain in the neck. We're building a boardwalk. So I don't disrupt. I can be part of it. I don't disrupt it. And the migratory birds and turtles and like all the things. So it is that reminder of like, I'm living amongst. And I think, you know, did you see the octopus teacher during COVID? Like that had just such a profound impact on me of this realization of, and I knew it, but the reminder of it's not just about my world. Like I'm inside of a lot of other worlds and they're much bigger than myself. So I digressed. I went on a little magical mystery tour, but there we go. And here we are.
Magical mystery tours are the best. And I think what I got out of that, and it connects back to what began our conversation, is you have learned how to be intentional about what matters to you and how to connect that back to make sure your sort of like mental health is at least tracking as best as you can in this chaotic world. And I think one of the things that, whether you're in startup world or you're professional career or whatever it might be, people get lost a little bit. And I think it's because they have a lack of intention in what they want. They just sort of go through life and don't think about it. Our friend Owen posted a thing the other day about more is not a unit of value. And I just thought it was so interesting because it's that idea, like people don't actually know what they're trying to get to. They're just going. And I think that lack of intention, lack of meaning is causing so many problems in how people interact with their job and their families and their life. So I applaud the intention you've decided to take, even if it is more expensive for a boardwalk and a wetland and the rest of it.
I don't always get it right. And I've done a lot of work on looking for my signals, right? So we all feel things and experience things in our own unique ways. And it's not that that's right or it's wrong. It's understanding how those responses or those feelings, do they work? Do they not work? And if they're not working, what are the signals? And when I start paying attention to those, it's a nice equalizer to bring back because look, I have my hands in a lot of pots. I'm finishing up a book. I'm doing different things. And I have the same stress that I think many people go through when they have their own business and it's a weird market and you're writing a book and you have a deadline and insert like all the ands. And our life is a series of and statements. And I'm trying to lean into the shades of gray of marrying some and or statements. Mm-hmm. And that's been really like, look at I always am fascinated by that image on your back wall because all of those lines are not connected. So it's a different path of, and I could do that, or I could go over here and be in this different place. And I think it's that realization of, I still am. I'm very much a perfectionist and a type A and a control freak. And that really, like, those are things I used to pride myself on where I'm like, this makes me great. I remember interviewing and it's like, what are your strengths? I can do a lot of things. I'm interested in a lot of things. I'm a perfectionist. I won't rest until the thing gets done and it's done perfectly. And like, I mean, in all of that, like employers that I worked with and for were like drooling. And I remember them saying, how do we make more people like Amy? And I've been in team meetings where it's like, just be like Amy. I mean, there's so many things inside of that statement that I've learned of why that doesn't necessarily work for myself and for others around me. But I think it's like, it used to be just a compounding effect of lots of ands and lots of pressure in the ands and lots of stress that comes from the pressure that's in the ands. And then I realized I'm driving myself into the ground and I'm not grounding myself. That doesn't feel good. And even if it's for just like, my husband's really good at reminding me this, even if it's just for like a second, he'll be the one that's like, hey, come here for a second. I was walking up our driveway this morning. He's like, hey, come over here. There's a little baby bun, like we call Bunzer, like little baby Bunzer's just hopping around. And he's like, we need to reroute baby Bunzer because if we don't, like baby Bunzers prey for the hawk that comes flying through here. So it's just like, it's like that little bit. And I'm talking about it now because it brought like just a little bit of joy before I got into my crazy day. Mm-hmm. So I digress, but yeah, I guess the TLDR is I am very much a black and white person, and I'm starting to really lean into the shades of gray. I said this before, but truly at this stage in my life, I think those or statements are pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to also realize about yourself that you thought was your superpower and maybe realizing it's not, it's, maybe not the current version of Marvel, but the old comic book versions, if you got into them, I mean, it was so powerful what they said, because it was always this dichotomy, right? Of like superpower, but what's the downside, right? And thinking through that and how you go about life. And, it's actually one of the things that I told you I've been thinking about is this constant short-term versus long-term thing going on right now. And this concept of effort. And it's driving me crazy sort of, because I don't know how to help people that want help or push back on some of that push that I'm getting, right? So to give you an example, right, is like right now in our society, you have sort of people who are like, as you said, looking for people who just are willing to work beyond the hustle culture thing. Just like nobody wants to work anymore. This statement that keeps getting told. But if you actually like dig into it, it's actually more along the lines of people want to work. They're just sick of doing crap, right? But how do you find that? And it turns out that I don't know if it's external. And I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because I feel like so much of when people ask me, like, why do you work as much as you do? Where do you get that effort from? It's not an external force, really. It's an internal force. I'm interested in what I'm doing, and I want to spend time there. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are, if that is what the disconnect is right now with employees and employers, and just generally how we're interacting with life.
I don't know if it's like a want to work or not work thing. When I'm thinking about what's interesting in that statement is this concept. So like thinking about, so many words came up while you were talking. And I think the first thing is, I had dinner with a founder recently that I've done business with. We're both LPs in the same fund. And I've known him in 2 different startups. So he's a 2-time founder, one really lovely exit. Business is going really well. And he's also been a customer of mine, and I advise him. Not him, but his company. I'm an advisor. And so like I see him in a lot of different dimensions, and I just like one of the best humans. And we were talking over dinner, and I was getting very passionate about. So TLDR, or like a little disclaimer for anybody listening to this, I am very much an outspoken person, and my tonality sometimes can sound like I'm mad. I'm not mad at all. I just get nerded out by this. So just a little disclaimer on Amy Volas for anybody that wants it. I'm not yelling at you. I just get amped up, and I'm going to start getting amped up. I already know it. It's like, okay, this is a topic that is important because it's how we're working together, and it's how society is sort of evolving. And look, we can't ignore this digital age that we're in. But the thing that I believe that will get people to not be replaced by bots is really getting back to basics. And he and I were talking about this, where the market is funky if you're in tech. It really is. It's hard for founders. It's hard for workers. It's hard for service providers like me. There's a lot of fear, and that's paralyzing. And I think everyone's kind of like, is this a recession? Is this a correction? What is this? And why does it not stop? And why does my rear end keep getting handed to me on a silver platter? And oh, now it's an election year. What's that going to be? So it's like this, like, since COVID, this like frantic, chaotic pace of, I have to do more with less. I have to figure this out. I can't admit my faults because my board is up my rear end. I have to raise money, and everybody is telling me no. Like, it's like all this stuff. And so he and I were talking about, like, we've ended up in a super transactional place. And I'm going to use the word transactional. I don't necessarily think it's intentional, meaning intentionality might be there. I don't think it's void, but I think it's intentionality of prioritizing the wrong things. Thank you, social media, for this one. I can go to LinkedIn right now, and I promise you, thank God I don't do this. I don't scroll my feed, and I use a company called Aware. So I only see what I want to see from people that I only want to see it from. And if I want somebody new, you know what I do is I pay attention to people like Sal, and who is he engaging with? Because like attracts like. So that's my little hack, my little pro tip for anybody that wants to know how to do it. But that being said, I could go on LinkedIn right now, and I could see people with really, really big voices. And all of a sudden, it's like, guess what? I just launched a course, and that course is going to tell you how to leapfrog your way into rapid success. And you too can be a millionaire by the age of 22 if you follow my 30-step program in this private community that you're going to pay for. And oh, and by the way, I've taken this other course to know how to write really engaging content, because I know that every story has to have a hero, a villain, and a happy ending. Oh, and I also know that hook needs to like grab you in and seduce you. And while all that's true, right? I have to look at the substance of the person, of the thing, of what is their angle here. And everyone's got one. I have one too, by the way. And it's okay to go to LinkedIn and want to make money. We're all doing it. Let's be honest. But not but, and I'm not even going to do an or statement here. And how, why, right? I am not a nonprofit center. And I care deeply about the ecosystem that I occupy. It's why I started my business. And I want to be part of the conversation. There's a difference there than, oh, you know what? I don't want to do this. And I do think that there is a big rhetoric that people tell themselves, I shouldn't have to. Entitlement is gross and it's all over the place. And victim mentality is gross and it's all over the place. I know plenty of people that have been through hell and back that are the biggest victims of their own story, but flip the script to decide to figure out a path to be the hero of it too. Because here's the thing. My husband and I were walking the other day and he said this and I was like, oh my gosh, so good. So good. And it's like stuck with me. And I don't normally say that about everything that he says. So I'm going to give credit where it's due. But he was like, you know, here's the deal. Because we were talking about health. And recently I had a very unexpected death in my family with a 43-year-old healthy man playing basketball that just collapsed and died and leaves behind a family and my cousin. And it's horribly sad. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this and we were talking, when this happens, right? You start talking to your spouse about like, do we have life insurance? Do we have enough life insurance? Like what's going on here? What's happening? We're not going to kill each other, but like, we just need to make sure that if one leaves, the other one's okay. And right. Where are all the passwords? How are all the bills paid? Like, you know, you start having these conversations and we were talking about our parents and that sometimes our parents, like we become the parent of our parents at times. And do our parents have these plans? And what does that look like? So we were talking about one of our family members and one of our family members is very outspoken about, I have the health of a 40-year-old. And I could put on some shoes right now and run a mile. And I'm like, please don't do that because you will drop dead as well. Like, do not do that. You're going to roll out an ankle, blow out a shin. You're going to have a bad wheel. Like, do not do that. And I said, my husband said, well, he is a walking candidate for a bad instance of health, like a issues, because he does not live the intention that he's saying. And I said, don't will that. This is where the brilliance comes into play. I said, don't will that into, so this is my Reiki coming through. Like, do not put that out into the atmosphere. Like, do not will that into existence. And he looked at me and we're on the walk and he was like, it has nothing to do with will. It has to do with how you live, what you do. And so back to the concept of work, I think there is something absolutely to be said for, people don't want to work anymore. It's how, and it's this absolute disconnect with reality of, to be super successful, to be that person that's writing that course, which half the time they're not successful themselves, but okay. You have to pay your dues. You have to hone your craft. You actually have to learn something. So there's a difference between content, stuff that you can read, consume, get, whatever, the context around it to even know why it matters, and the competence to do something with it. And I find there's way too much content and there's a way big deficit of context and competence. And so that's the thing that I think in this transactional world of, I want to be like this person on Instagram. I want to be that TikToker. I want to be an influencer. I want to be a creator. Not all of us can do all the same thing. And so in my mind's eye, and I'm on a major tangent here, so I'm going to rein myself in here. I think, Sal, to the Pandora's box that you just opened up with me, I think it's a transactional world that we're living in that creates this short-sighted, what's in it for me only scenario of where we're seeing work shift, and this disconnect of, if I jump every 3 months, 6 months, every year, especially I come from go-to-market. If you're in enterprise sales, your party is just getting started in the first 12 to 18 months. Full stop. True story. You cannot tell me that you are a top rep in 6 months and you keep jumping around if you are in enterprise sales. And if you work for a startup that says they're enterprise sales, sorry, folks, a little baby, teeny tiny, small deal at a franchise with McDonald's Corporation is not enterprise. It is a baby, small deal inside of a really large company. Know the difference. I'm not yelling at you. Remember, this is my passion coming through. So just saying.
There's a lot to unpack there, obviously.
Welcome. This is you and I. This is
I know. This is why I love this, right? I can ask like a generalized question and it'll always lead to something interesting. And although I sort of knew what I was getting into, obviously. So, okay. So I want to talk about transactional a little bit, because I think one thing you pulled out there that I think is important is this is a two-sided equation. Oftentimes the employee is focused on short-term gain, but they've been told they need to focus on short-term gain because every employer has done the model over the last 30 years that business school told every MBA that talent doesn't matter, just costs, eliminate it, transactional to the quarter number, to the half year number, to the yearly number. We have to hit our street shareholder dividend, all these parts and pieces. And I think you're seeing kind of this coalescing right now of both sides unhappy and yet nobody exactly willing to blink and try to reset the narrative. Although I do think you're starting to see more, at least in my world, of this bootstrap mentality, which is, I think, a push towards more control. Let's build companies in ways that are good for the company, the founder, the equity team, whatever it might be, the investor, but also for the employee, right? I mean, I think people forget there was an age where there were huge, wildly profitable companies that were focused on their people, not the shareholder. And I think that's something that's important in this narrative on the transactional piece of this. And I again, to pitch it back to you, you are in the space of helping people hire and go to market. And so it's like almost a perfect colliding of universes. And so if I'm a founder or I'm a CEO or whatever it might be, and I'm going to hire employees, the standard prototypical thing has been you ask these questions, you have a metric, and you're trying to find people that sound like Amy. I work all the time. I have all this, effort and fire and all this stuff, right? And yet they're also getting told on the backside, you have to hit this number. And so if your person doesn't hit their first quarter, well, fire them, get somebody else. So I'm just curious, like, how do we connect that? How do we offset that? Is there a way right now?
So I'm writing notes because you've got, and Roy's here. He can't help himself. I mean, even if I shut the doors, that's just an invitation for him to totally bombard in.
Javi's at my feet, and I'm sure he'll start barking at some point. So,
I mean, look, Roy has a lot more to say on the topic than I do, clearly. So I'm so glad that you brought up the two-sided element of this coin, because it's not, you mentioned I riffed off of people not wanting to work anymore. And so then I think about the worker, but I'm going to be real honest here. The majority of the challenges that I have in the work that I do have very little to do with the candidate side. So, and sorry. And by the way, I'm so thrilled. I have hope from the work that I do because I only work with a handful of startups and founders at a time. And one of my superpowers is being very clear in my communication and establishing expectations up front early and often together. So this is how we work. This is what we're going to do. This is what we need from you. How do you feel about that? What do you need? And to marry those two things together so that the cards are face up on the table. Candidates, and so I deal with what executive sales and CS leaders. They're looking for a place where they can grow and thrive and be supported and be enabled and be part of. And I think if you mentioned a really valuable word called bootstrap. I'm a bootstrap gal through and through. Started 3 companies. They were all bootstrapped. It'll be something will have totally shifted for me to take funding because you never say never, right? But Part of that is, I believe, and everybody I've talked to about this, people that are worth their weight, that have been around, that have had great success, where do you think the problems start? Because I believe three things. You can't do a business without people. You can't do a business without people with the right process and systems. And you can't do a business without the right people, the right process, and the right systems, and no delivery. You need to deliver too. So where does it start? Every time without fail, always people. Communication, people. Process failing, people. Like people. Oh, and by the way, you can tell me that the bots are coming for me, and they certainly are. That's cool. But the people are programming the bots, and even the bots programming the other bots, it had to start with a person. Oh, and the bots are paying attention to the people. So like if the people part is busted, then everything else kind of like correlates with that. And so let's think about what happened. So I'm older than I want to admit. I've been around for nearly 3 decades. And I go back, and it's funny. I talked to somebody recently, and they were like, actually, I didn't talk to somebody. I heard this. Simon Sinek was talking about capitalism and how the days of Jack Welch at GE, that he really drove that wedge that we are suffering from now, where it was all about your shareholders, all about your margins, all about, and you weren't really hearing a lot about profitability. It was all about the numbers of everything else and satisfying these shareholders. And somehow, that bled into all these other places. And, when I came up through the ranks, people still mattered. I remember my first recession, and the CEO sat me down and he's like, Aim, I'm going to shoot you really straight here. This is how I got into sales, by the way. I'm going to shoot you really, I was a tech recruiter. I don't know who that person was. I don't know how that happened, but we're going to leave her in the 90s where she belongs. So, what was interesting is he sat me down and he looked me at it. He flew me out to Colorado. From Chicago, flew me out to Colorado, sat me down, person to person, eye to eye, not CEO to subordinate, not any of that. And just looked me in the eye and he was like, look around. Nobody's left. And the only way, we love you. I'd survived multiple layoffs at this point. We love you. And the only way that you can stay here is if you get into sales. And I know you don't want to do it. Let's talk about it. Choice and consent. My choice, my consent, my career. And we co-created. By the time I got into sales, it was enterprise sales. It was too late. But my gosh, what a gift. That changed the trajectory of my entire life. So Gary, thank you. I hated watching the company go under. I hated watching good people go, but it was about the people. And what's interesting is when I've seen this over the last 10 to 15 years, it's kind of like what happened in sales, where we create this conveyor belt of sales. I'm going to go to a BDR and SDR, and then I'm going to get handed off to the AE. And I actually don't even get a say in what I want to see. I'm just going to get demoed, and you're going to talk at me. It's not even anything that I want to see. Oh, and then I'm going to, what? I don't deal that way at the grocery store. Could you imagine me going through the grocery store? I'm at Trader Joe's. Here I am. I'm excited. They got a good playlist on Sirius XM. I'm like, yeah, and here I come. I'm going to Trader Joe's. I roll up. I can hear the music from the parking lot. It delights me. I'm like, this is amazing. And all of a sudden, somebody in their crew shirt, in their Hawaiian floral motif, flies out the side door, shoves a cart at me. I don't need a cart. I just came here for the eucalyptus. That's all I wanted today. Shoves a cart at me, physically takes me and says, go down aisle 2 because we have a new frozen item that you are going to love. We are going to PLG the mess out of this frozen item. We're going to let you taste it. We're going to let you use it. Don't you want more of it? No, I don't want your frozen item. And I'm going to churn right on out of Trader Joe's and take my business to my farmer's market. Somehow we lost sight of how we do the rest of our life. It's not like we have an out-of-body experience and go through a car wash and become this buying bot or business bot or whatever. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think you have founders that care a lot about what we're talking about. And at Sal, they're like, this is great. And I'm excited. I'm smart. And I've got something and it's doing something. And my customers are responding to this. And I'm in it with them and I love it. But for me to do the next thing, I actually need money. So what do? And it's their first time. They've never done this before. They go on the road show. They pack it up and they start talking to VCs. I will tell you, some of the very best VCs that you want money from, they're going to be the hardest, most discerning folks. Don't get turned off by that. Check your ego. Those are the people that you want to start talking to because they've been here before. If you know that you have vaporware or it is a vitamin and not a painkiller, and the people are like, yeah, those are the buyer bewares. And it's funny, a friend of mine, Jenna, her name is Jenna Boer. She is a clinical psychologist. She's got a PhD. She works with founders in a way that I've never seen anybody else. She coaches them in their executive teams. And she wrote an article. It was either for Entrepreneur or Fortune, like one of these places, tech, something, recently about the archetypes of VCs. You've got the daddy. Like all these different things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Everybody needs to read this article because as you're vetting your VC, who you choose, because guess what? This is your baby right now. The minute you take somebody else's money, it's not your baby any longer. You now have a boss. And if you have a board, you have more than one boss. Oh, and if you gave up too much, they can vote you out, right? And so that thing that you cared about and the people that you cared about and the promises that you made and how you showed up for your customer, it no longer becomes your own, and you better make sure that you're aligned. And I think I went off again on a tangent, Sal, but I think the thing that really struck a chord with me was this two-sided coin where it's actually multidimensional. It's not just two sides. You've got the investing side, and if it's PE versus VC, that's different. Versus angel, it's different. Then you have the first-time founder side that's well-intended, that's really smart, wicked talented, super technical, has no idea about go-to-market, has no idea how to manage people, and has no idea how to check their ego to admit to themselves, I'm a horrible leader. I need an executive coach. I need leadership training for me to do this, or I need to have a different kind of adult in the room run the business for me. So yeah, guess what? Where I'm having the majority of struggles are on founders that are so afraid, that made such big promises to their board, that don't know how to have a conversation with their board to level set. They want it with their executive team. I want you to tell me what's going on, but they refuse to do it with their board. The fish always stinks at the head, folks. And if you're a founder, you're the head.
Yeah. I think what resonates with me the most is this idea that you need to have transparency in like every part of this conversation. And that's what seems to get lost, right? Transparency on the investor side, whether it's VC, PE, angel, whatever, of like what they actually want versus just this endless loop of great things, right? Or on the other side of it is like, what do I want as a founder or as a CEO or whatever the heck it is? And can I talk to my board? Can I actually tell my board, or can I tell the investors that I brought on, hey, back off. Like, we are trying to build something here. We're not just trying to deliver you money, right? It's like this endless loop of public companies doing share buybacks, right? And then firing people. It's like this disconnect. And I do feel like there is at least starting to have some conversation, but it's hard, right? I mean, I think it's hard to be transparent because it's scary. And, you know, a lot of people don't know how to deal with that disconnect, that fear to get where they want to go.
Well, and if you're not willing to show up for your people, here's a cold, hard truth that you can't be disappointed when they don't show up for you.
Mm.
And it's funny, my husband and I were with family a couple of weekends ago, and my brother-in-law, his company was just acquired by PE, and he was on the partner track. And he's like, they're doing away with the partners. All the partners are going. And so my husband, who is in a similar industry, was interested and didn't know that had happened and was looking it up. And the PE firm is all about growth, right? All about that growth in a different way than VC. But this particular PE firm, they're all about this growth. The majority of the partners are on their way out, bought out, etc. And the partner model won't still be the same. And what's interesting is they have slashed over 1,000 jobs because while the company was profitable, really profitable and doing well, they want to grow more. What on earth do you think that says to everybody else that's there? And by the way, in the work that I do, when this happens, my phone blows up when it happens in our industry, where you've got the top people that are your cherry prized possessions that are literally like, you just sent a real big, you didn't have to say a word. Your action told me everything that I need to know, where I'm expendable too. And you know what's crazy is this, and I'm all in like this big moment of processing through this, sadly, this loss in my family. His name was Danny. He was at his company for 20 years. People that he grew up with, that he went to college with, moved to Chicago to work with him. And he made partner about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And at his funeral, where there were over 1,000 people, lots of people that he worked with had this to say. The CEO, by the way, was like, yeah, so when we thought about him, it was easy for me to talk about why he should be a partner. And I mean, in just the way he talked about him and the relationship that they had had, and the fact that Danny was highly skeptical over the role because it was a global risk role that he would be responsible for. Thankless job. So when all holy hell is happening, it's your fault. And when everything's great, you just go into the ether. But it was a meaty role, and they co-created it and talked about it, and it made sense. And so many people that he worked with, that worked for him, that worked around him, said this: the best 5 to 10 minutes of my day was when I got to talk to Danny. You can't fake, like, I can't fake that story, right? Like, I can't fake that all these people have worked there for years and years and years and years. And by the way, they're a trading company. Do you know what the stigma is of traders? And they are not that at all. And they all have been there for years. And so back to your point, Sal, of does this exist? Can we get back to, I believe so. When I hear stories like that and I see them and it's happening right now, I think it's a decision. And it's a hard decision for a founder, where it's, what am I willing to do? And what am I willing not to do? What is my value system? Because if it's, I just need to grow and get to this multiplier and do this thing, all this is going to get sacrificed. And it's also going to be a very seductive, shiny object when you have money that's thrown your way. So I think it starts with us and who we decide to do things with.
It's always about people. It's always about people, right? And every company that has been successful is about the people. It wasn't some paint by numbers. It was the people, right? Like, and I do think, you know, pulling some of that out is, venture has a paint by numbers. This is what you're supposed to do. You hit this thing, you hit this growth rate, then we can find you on the next one. And it's throw it against the wall to try to get enough that one of them hits to cover the rest of the payout for the rest of the LPs, right? And like, that's what we're doing, right? And PE has a model of, well, we cut it down to bare bones, we pull out as much profit as we can, we put on equity on top of it and sell it. Or if we're going to growth mode, right? I actually don't frankly understand PE in growth mode, because that doesn't make any sense to me. But besides the point, right? Like, yes, let's just genius fire everybody, but try to grow. Again, it's the people. And so I do think the problem, though, is there is this world of, and it tends to be technology or capital intensive businesses where you just need outside capital, right? There's just too much long-term growth you need to hit, or it's deep tech or whatever it might be. And yet there's this disconnect still, right? And so I don't know what to tell founders, because some of it you just can't bootstrap, right? You don't have $25 million sitting under your cushion, right? And so I think it is hard, and you need strong founding team, a strong executive team to really be able to talk to the investors, to talk to your board and explain, no, we're not going to just fire these people because they didn't hit one quarter. We're trying to build an enduring company, something bigger than ourselves. And it is a difficult conversation. It is heartwarming for me to hear you say that there are companies out there still like that. I just don't see it that much anymore. And it's a difficult thing to watch happen.
Sadly, I don't see it as much either. And we wonder, like, you can't have it just one way. Like, every action has a reaction. And I think, if I'm that founder and the technology is too deep, or I've hit a crossroads, by the way, I know plenty of VCs that are wonderful, absolutely wonderful. You just have to define, like, let's use that word that you used at the top of the call or the podcast, intentionality. If I know what I stand for, if I know why I'm doing this, if I know what my value system are, if I know that after a bad quarter, because we're going to have a bad quarter, that I don't want to, like, chop people off at the knees. Because, by the way, let me tell you this: if you keep turning people over, that's way more expensive than what you're trying to avoid in the first place. So, that's a whole other podcast episode, but that's the long-term thinking, right? Of, like, what does this actually cost? And it's not always dollars and cents. Yes, that's a 7-figure problem, multiple 7-figure problem, but it's the other costs, the costs that aren't so tangible, that creep up over time. It's the stuff when you're not in the room that you can't control. And so, what's interesting is there are VCs that are not icky, and there are VCs that are icky, and there are VCs that are good and bad in the same firm. It just depends on the partner. And so, and same with PE. But I just think it's like, if you are clear, everything and everyone else around you can be. And what happens is, when it's your first time at the rodeo and you're scared and you need this, you're not clear. And so it sounds good and you get caught up in this narrative. And I think that's where you start getting into bed with the wrong people that harm you later. And so I guess what I would say is, if you find yourself in that place of, I'm not bootstrapped, and that's okay. I do plenty of business with wonderful VCs, and I do plenty of business with people that are bootstrapped, and I do plenty of business with PE. But what I think is interesting is, know what you stand for, and know that if you have to feel like you're forcing it, or vice versa, something's off. And like anything, it could be dating, it could be hiring, it could be fundraising, it could be finding a co-founder, it could be your executive team, it could be your friends, it could be anything. If I just want to press the fast forward button to get to the outcome that I wish to achieve, aka funding, hire, whatever it is, marriage, and that's all I'm focused on, the other person is too. Do you know how much context is missed? And now I'm making really big, life-altering, business-altering decisions based on assumptions. That is a bad bet, in my opinion.
I second that opinion. I actually don't also think it's that controversial. I just think people don't want to face reality. They like to pretend something isn't the way it is. And I think that is also part of the narrative, is like, there are great venture capitalists, right, who are patient and willing and understand and really want to grow founding teams and solid businesses. And just, there are great PE in the same way, right? Unfortunately, I think, like everything, you get this, there's not enough of it, right? And the narrative doesn't present itself in a way that is helpful to everybody, right? And you don't know, right? If you're just first-time founder, you're trying to raise money, venture capital comes to you, angel, whoever it might be, here's some money. You're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And you don't take the time to really think through, is this good for me or not, right? And where that leads you is sometimes a trap, and you just don't know. And I think what the other part of this is sometimes, especially in the market we're in right now, that might be the only choice you have. And you have to make a decision. Do you shut down the business, or do you take that cash with the strings attached to it? I don't have an answer for our audience out there, and I don't think there's a correct answer for everybody. I do think that part of the conversation needs to be, how do we help founding teams, executive teams with their communication? I think it's a huge miss, right? I think we get all kinds of help with go-to-market and finances and how to raise and all the rest of it. And there's not enough of that just standard, like, this is how you communicate. This is how you talk to your team. This is how you talk to investors. This is that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Do you want a crazy stat about communication?
Would love it.
So Grammarly did a major study with the Harris Poll. And for those of you that don't know, Harris Poll is like legit research. It's not like, oh, I just like created something out of thin air and said that it's cool and I put my logo on it and said the research says. No. This is legit. How much do you think in the US alone, forget about anywhere else, how much do you think we spend on poor communication in business in the US?
I mean, my guess is a lot of money. I have no idea.
Just take a guess. I love this game.
$500 billion.
You're being conservative. 1.2 trillion.
Oh my God.
And to make it worse, right? And I actually think that's probably conservative, because if you parlay it, there's the intangibles that you can't understand, of like poor communication, your sales pipelines, like all that. But to make matters worse, and I also think that this is conservative too, but on average, every single person, whether it's the CEO, whether it's the like entry-level customer success person, like whoever it might be, right, spends on average 8 hours per week cleaning up after poor communication. Like, imagine that Slack message gets misinterpreted. The communication you sent that was really well intended because you had to lay people off went over like a bag of lead hammers. And, like whatever that, I don't even know if that's a thing, but I just made it a thing. I don't know, bag of lead hammers. I mean, here we go. Bag of lead hammers for the win. I want to see it be a hashtag on social media.
It's going to be so good.
But, think about it. How many times have you sent a text and afterwards it's like, that's not the tone that I intended. I just fired it off. I responded. And so, yeah, I'm going to underscore an exclamation point in a major way. Everything truly, personally and professionally, starts with our ability or inability to communicate.
I work really hard at communication, both the empathy side of it and just like the transparency side of it. I've always been pretty good at the transparency side of it, but I've also gotten a lot of the like, dude, you are intense. Can you back it down a little bit because you were scaring people, right? And so trying to figure out the other side of it, right? Of like, okay, how do you balance that with empathy and how you communicate? But generally speaking, I've always learned that even if I'm too far on the like transparent, it usually works itself out better than if I'm not transparent. So I sort of optimize that way. And the number of times I've had people tell me, how do I communicate that way? How did you learn to do this? And I just said, look, you work at it and you're intentional about it, right? So anytime I start interacting with a client, I have like a set thing I send. This is what I do when I send you emails. This is why I send it this way. I don't make assumptions. So if you're hearing me say something, don't take offense because I just didn't assume it. All these things that help me communicate, right? I'm not perfect by any means. I don't know who is, right? But nobody is. But even that, knowing that $1 trillion+ is a huge number, right? I mean, if you think about it, they're talking about AI giving us $1 trillion. Like, how about we just communicate better? Everybody will make more money, right? That's wild. It kind of blew my mind. So, all right.
It blew mine too. That's why it's ingrained in my brain. But it is, I think we're in a world also where lots of people talk about help, but help has also become like commoditized in a weird way. Admitting that you actually need help, admitting that you are not a great communicator when X happens. And, you know, the thing that I was listening to is you were like, well, I've worked on it. And by the way, transparent, intense person sees transparent, intense person. Hello, I'm right there with you. And I've received the same feedback as well. And I agree with you. It's like a muscle that you have to continue to work. And if you don't, it'll atrophy. Trust me on that. It's one of those things that, like, I also can't change the fundamental piece of who I am because I believe in authenticity as well. And it's also not okay to come in like a wrecking ball of, I could be right, I could be transparent, this is what makes sense. But if I'm polarizing everybody else around me, that also doesn't do anything because we have to do it together. And one of the things that I've learned, and you did it while you were describing, and I think it's a really good, so like making it actionable for anybody listening to this is when you, whoever you might be, right? Because also if you are timid of your own shadow to speak up, that communication or lack thereof also doesn't work for you. I'm doing two totally different kinds, right? And there's all the 50 shades of gray in the middle of it. But what's interesting is, I think for those of us that fit that profile of how you described it, I've learned understanding how it comes through. And if you noticed, I did it here where I'm like, hey, I'm not yelling at any of you. I get nerded out. This is my love language. And it's probably the half Italian in me. I don't know, but I know that I have, and I don't even realize, especially if I'm like in the conversation, that it's happening, because sometimes we can't see outside of ourselves in the moment. But that disclaimer shows the other person, I actually care about this conversation. And I know myself because I've done the work to understand that I can come across this way. Sometimes I'm like, hey, here's a safe word. If it's getting too crazy, just say this. And it creates a little bit of humor, a little bit of levity. And also it helps us communicate well together. These aren't, when I'm not minimizing it, they're not hard tactics to embrace. You just have to care to understand yourself and the signals and have some tools. And I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but it is simple when you take the time to understand it.
I think there's a couple things you said there that I want to make sure we call out a little bit. One is that help is not bad.
Yeah.
It's an important part of this conversation. And it actually, to some extent, actually falls into the short-termism, long-term thing. You know, again, Simon Sinek, right? I heard him on some podcast recently, and he was like, people complain about return to the office, right? They want to be where they are at home or whatever it might be. But have they said anything? Have they come up with a solution? Have they made an effort, right? And if the answer is no, then, you know, you don't really get a voice at the table because you haven't tried to help. But I think one thing that he missed there was part of the reason some people don't do that is because they've been taught that if they open their mouth, they get fired. It's that short-term, long-term piece of it, right? And so it's also the same idea of help. If I ask for help, they're going to think I can't do my job, right? And there's this coalescing thread that we've been talking about this whole podcast of how do you connect all these pieces to give people both the safety to ask for help and to provide input, because frankly, as a founder, as a business owner, I want that. The more good ideas, the better, right? And on the opposite side, still get your team to understand, like, we are a business. We have to make money. We have to grow. We have to do well. And again, I think it just comes back to like good communication, transparency, and being intentional gets you so far. And yet we've lost so much of that in how we interact with each other.
But also, yes, and those are not fluffy words. Like, I feel like so many people throw out the word help. So many people throw out the word intentionality. And it's almost like it just bastardizes it, right? It takes away the essence of what it is. And the only way to keep it rooted in the powerful word that it is you have to be it. So if I talk about intentionality on my website, if I talk about accountability, if I talk about transparency, I have to be willing, if I want to see it in practice, to live it, even when it's hard. Because that's the thing. When it's easy, cool, kumbaya, let's do all the things. When it's hard is where people choose the easy path, that transactional path, that, you know what, I actually don't want to fire my team, so I'm going to have somebody else do it for me. People team, how about you come in and do it? Like, what? And so, it's like choose your hard now or a hell of a lot harder later. And I think for me, I am very clear about, I know my strengths and I know where I really get it wrong. And I still sometimes get it wrong. But helping the people that I work with and that are around me understand that, they give me a little bit of grace. Now, if that becomes the norm, well, now Amy's lost her mind and something's going on here. But I think it's like living the thing that we're talking about. So accountability isn't just because we talk about it and I want you to be accountable, because if you miss your number, I want you to be accountable to that. And now you're going to get fired. Here's the thing about the number, by the way, for anybody listening to this. Sure, your sales leader can own the number because it's easy to measure them to that number, but they cannot, no amount of sales talent is going to fix a busted down product that the market doesn't want. Full stop. End of story. So sure, you can churn through, and I've talked to many founders that have done this. You can go through 5 sales leaders that's going to cost you multiple 7 figures because you're looking for what you want to hear. Here's the thing about intentionality. It's being in tune. It's designing something intentionally. Accountability isn't just me telling you that I'm accountable. It's when things go south and I actually show up to be accountable, to say, I'm sorry, to say I screwed up, to give myself safety in that moment as the founder, the leader, whatever, so that other people know that they can too. Because how many times have you met somebody where they're like, I'm a servant leader. I am a people leader. I am a person of the people. And then you start talking to people and it's like, yeah, that's all well and good when things are great. And then when things go wrong and you don't tell them what they want to hear, they lash out at you. That's not taking your accountability. That's not a person of the people. And it's okay to say, you know what? This is really hard to hear. I don't know if I'm prepared for this conversation right now. Thank you for the TLDR. Can we come back to this tomorrow? Let me collect my thoughts so I don't react. Because you're pulling up something inside me that I don't want you to see. Choice and consent. Interesting.
Funny how that works. I think you said something that I want to get into a little bit, which is what you measure matters. And whether it's in sales or anything else, right? If the only thing you're focused on is the number, and I'm not trying to dismiss that if you're in sales and you're trying to hit a quota on a number, that it's not important. It's obviously important. It's revenue for the business. That's how you make money. That's how you pay everybody. I get that. But when you disconnect that number from everything else, that's where I feel people get the failure comes from, right? Is like, one, oftentimes numbers get picked out of thin air, no matter how much they talk about the bottoms up or top down or the rest of it. Like,
Amen.
It's just a random number that the board decided, or the CEO said, I need to give this big number to make the board happy.
Or we're going to do the triple, double, double. Like, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Formulas.
Formulas, right? And you're like, okay, fine. You picked a number. And then you look through what's happening and it's like, well, we're churning customers because, again, our product sucks. Or we made a promise on a new feature and guess what? We're 3/4 behind. Or all these ancillary pieces. And oftentimes, especially in startups, you forget that you often hired your first sales leader, help you build out the actual foundation, not just hit a number. They're trying to build systems and process and all the rest of it. And I think where you sit, as you talk to founders and companies, I mean, is that hitting with them, or are they just still very focused on, look, we got to hit a number and that's the number and we're just going to churn these sales reps, etc.?
Some yes, some no. And I'd be lying if I was like, every single person that I work with is yes. There have been many instances where I've worked with a founder that started with yes and raised money through the search process and changed, and so here's the thing, this is iterative, it changes, but we have a choice, and it's a hard choice. How do we choose to show up? What does that actually look like? And I get it, it's hard, it's really hard right now for so many founders. This market is bananas. I don't know when it's going to end. And you know what? There is a bunch of dry powder laying around. Nobody knows how to value anything because nothing has happened yet. And so it's like, what came first? The exit or the money? Like, it's just like, what is it? And so if you already were running too hot and now you're in a situation, or you're building something and you need money and this is your first time, and you're not a great communicator. Talking to somebody and looking them in the eye comes very difficult for you. I get it. I've met many of you. You have to then decide what you want. Because if you want to be the CEO and you want to run a business, you have to hone that craft. Because that will help you choose who you get money from. It will help you have that board meeting. And also, here's the great thing about board meetings. I've met many founders that are like, it's like a black box. Only I am in the boardroom and nobody else on my executive team is. And I'll tell you what I think you need to know. You have your executive team that understands the front line a heck of a lot more than you do. That's why you have them there. Give them a seat at that table. I say this a lot, and this is where the two-sided coin comes into play. You can't tell me that you want a seat at the table and then I give it to you and you don't know what to do with it. Or you refuse to do anything with it. You hide underneath it, or you step away and you do this and you blame everybody else around you. Nothing good is going to happen with that. And so I think it's the same thing about communication. It is a choice. It is a hard choice every day, especially when things get twisted up in a knot and you're trying to unravel it. And if you've ever worn a necklace and it gets in that knot and you're like, oh my gosh, how do I get the knot out? And you're trying to take 2 pins and kind of undo it. Been there, done that before. I don't undo the knot in a second. It takes precision. It takes having the right tools to do it. And sometimes, even though I do that, it doesn't work. I have to then go to a jeweler. I have to ask for that help. And sometimes the jeweler's like, it's so busted, you need a new chain. Okay. But I think that's the thing, is like getting outside of what it should be according to everybody else that you read online, or what people that you admire that are in the same book as you, they're 800 chapters ahead. I know that you know how the book ends and you want that ending. You have no idea, though, the story that it took to get there. Because here's the thing, like, let's look at your image again on your back wall. That's how I think about success. It's messy like that. And none of those lines are straight, except for some of the connecting lines, but everything else connects to like a different squiggle. And so I think if we just start there and understand that, because here's the thing, it is a full circle moment of, yes, the VCs have money that you want, but if you say no to them, they don't deploy the money. So somebody has to start by choosing differently. And then, like, let's do some virtual grounding. I'm going to step outside of this conversation. I'm going to plant my feet into the ground and I'm going to look at this sweet baby mama cardinal that's looking at me. I love her. Right now, she's looking at me with her little baby orange beak. I love her so much. And I'm just going to remind myself that this is bigger than you and I. And it's bigger than you and I. And so what do you do with it? Well, you could get overwhelmed with it or buy it, or you can decide to do something different for what you can control. And that's the biggest, hardest, gnarliest lesson that I've learned. I can't control everybody else. But what I can certainly do is try to lead by my own example, to make my own decisions that are rooted in what's right for me, not trying to keep up with everybody else. And remember what I said about LinkedIn. I don't scroll. I use a tool so I don't have to see everybody else. I consume what I want to given what's important to me, my value system, what I'm interested in, and the conversations I want to be a part of. Full stop.
To close this idea for the moment, until we have the next 7-hour podcast, know what you stand for, right? Know what you stand for. Sometimes it's hard to figure that out, but work towards it, right? Know what you stand for. It'll help everything else.
Absolutely. Look at you, Sal. Know what you stand for. Most people would be like, are you out of your mind? Why wouldn't you just keep being a lawyer? You can make a bunch of money and live this life and do these things. Look at you, just did a deep eye roll. You literally just were like, you know, and maybe in the moment you were like, I don't know what I want to do. And that's okay. Half the time I'm like, am I doing the right thing? But when it goes back to what do I stand for? Here's what I say to a lot of people. I'm not for everybody. And that is a-okay. And a lot of people, they're really not my cup of tea either. And that's okay. What does good look like for me? And if you translate that into hiring, if you translate that into who you choose to do things with, co-founders, investors, whatever, if you translate that into who you want to be with, if you translate that into the friends that you choose, the mentors that you choose, the content that you consume, the news that you consume. It's really interesting how we are what we consume, literally and figuratively.
There's so much truth in that. And again, another 7-hour podcast.
I know. I'm sorry. We knew we were going to do this.
We knew, and I can't wait till the next one. And, I think, what you've been talking about behind me for those people listening is I have basically like a circuit board tree, right? And I loved it because I love technology. I've been moving more and more into that away from being a lawyer. And it just was like my growth thing, right? Like how do I every day look at that, give me motivation, intentionality, what I'm trying to do, right? And so that's why it's there for me. Before we close out, I do want to understand better what Avenue Talent Partners does. Where do you sit in the ecosystem so that our listeners can understand why they would come to you, other than you're amazing and I love having a conversation with you. Maybe sit in your backyard and enjoy the nature. One of those things. So.
I mean, look, there are still birds on my feeders. 2 of them need to be refilled though. Anyway, thank you for asking. So there are 2 ways that Avenue Talent Partners works with startups. The first is the most obvious. We are an executive search firm, and we help early stage tech startups hire executive sales and CS leaders. And so we hang out between the $1 million to $25 million ARR range. I don't even say rounds anymore because it's a funky market. So there you go. And then on the flip side, we realize that there are so many startups that need what we know, but they don't need executive search. They need to do a complete audit of their hiring process. They need to learn how to interview. I mean, speaking of communication, they need help with creating a hiring scorecard and what that even is. And so we will parachute ourselves in where they need it the most to provide consulting around the entire hiring process. So those are the 2 ways that we help. Our hotline is always on. And I can confidently say this, every single thing that you see that I share on our website, on any of the collateral, in my postings, we work really hard every day to live in practice. So I'm proud of that. That's a big win for us.
I'm sure we could deep dive into everything you all do. Again, another entire podcast. I do want to pull one nugget out for our audience on that is, if I'm going to go hire my first employee as a startup, right? Where do you think you start? Is it building a hiring scorecard? Is it identifying the exact function we need? How do you go about that?
No, those come later. And those are outcome driven, right? So I want to hire. Great. I want to do a lot of things too. My question always is, why? Why this role? Why now? And if it's everybody else is telling me, I got to discover. I got to go into discovery mode, and we're going to, and sometimes it's absolutely the time and sometimes it's not. I think it's funny. I'm talking to, they are a legal tech firm, Sal. What? And I talked to him 4 years ago in 2020, and they were just like little baby amoebas. They were just starting. And I had a call and really liked the guy, like really, really good dude. And I said, I've really enjoyed our conversation. You don't need to be talking to me at all. Like, this is not the right time. And this is not the right role for these reasons. Now, you're going to do whatever you want to do with that. And my hotline is always on, but I'm going to gracefully and respectfully say thank you, but no thank you for the following reasons. It was like an episode of Shark Tank. And so he sat there and literally, like, he ends up being a voyeur on LinkedIn. He's watching what I'm writing for all these years, for 4 years. And I have no idea. He's never engaged. He's never sent me a message. We've kept in touch via email, but I have no idea. And about a month ago, he knocks. So we're at, several million in ARR. And you told me about what it looks like when it is time. And this is what it looks like. And I know you want to know why. Here's why. I mean, I never felt more cared for, seen, understood, valued, and validated in my life than that. Talk about good communication, right? And so it's interesting where, if I'm answering your question succinctly without sharing a story, it's why do we even need to hire right now versus any of the what stuff?
I think it's really sound advice. Where do you want ATP to be in 5 years? Are you comfortable with where you are, or are you trying to build towards something?
This is a very interesting question that so many people ask me. So remember, I've survived 2 recessions. The word scale and we are not simpatico. I am very much for that for everybody else. And the work that I do supports people doing that. But for me, I'm really proud to say, through COVID, through ATP will be 9 years old in October of 2024. And when COVID hit, when markets change, I haven't had to worry about laying people off and going through these like big shifts. And so I care about moving the needle in the way that I want to move it. And I want to do really good business to leave this ecosystem better than when I found it. And I want to help startups. My data over the last decade plus speaks to, when you're hiring, you have about a 20% chance of getting it right. Also, Carta's data, their state of compensation report from last year, says if you're sub 10 million, the average tenure is less than 2 years, and it's worse in sales and marketing. I see that every day. And so when I think about why I exist, if you work our process, we escalate that number up from 20% to 80%. There's always a margin for error. We're dealing with humans, right? To defy the odds where you're not churning as much. And if you are, it's because something changed. It's not because of a competence issue or some other thing. It's because, we hired you to go enterprise and now we're going SMB, right? Like, nobody can control that. Nobody's Nostradamus. Mm-hmm. But I'm really proud of that. I want to double down on that. And so I don't grow by bodies. I grow by the quality of work. And I think for me, I want to show people you can do really meaningful work that turns a dial in a meaningful way without being a dirtbag, without being transactional, without cutting corners, and to show people what really good hiring looks like through being people-centric, but having a rockin' process to back it up, which we do. And so in 5 years, I want to keep doing this.
I do think that is often something that founders get caught up in. It's like, it's okay to say this is awesome, right? Like, that's an okay answer. So I love to hear that. Okay. As I close out podcasts, I'd like to ask 2 questions.
Yes.
The first one is, what's the driving force that pushes you forward every day?
I care a lot about walking my talk. I don't do well with a lack of integrity with people around me. I don't like a lot of talking and not a lot of doing. And so living in my value system to do good. It could be, you know, at work. It could be when I'm at the Pilates studio and pushing myself. It could be creating food that I'm excited to present. I don't care what it is. It could be snuggling up with my cat, Roy. It has to literally mean something to me, because if I, and one step further, trust. If I don't have trust, I'm out. I literally back right on out like a little baby lobster. And so that drives, like, do I want to be a person that people can trust with their businesses? Oh, the Papa Cardinal's here now. Love him. With their businesses, you know, hiring is not, like, exceptional hiring is not an experiment. And it is an incredible honor and a major responsibility that I'm really proud to be a part of. It changes when it goes well, right? It changes the trajectory of a business. That's a big deal. I can't do that without trust. And the only way that I can establish trust that wakes me up every morning is, am I living this or am I talking it only? And am I with people or around people that are doing the same? Because if it's just like a lot of hot air, I don't care who you are or how great you sound. It's like I have a guttural reaction. I can feel like my face grimace. I mean, I also feel like I may or may not have to mute a snarl. Like it's so pronounced where I just don't, I'm just not for that. And so that's my guiding force every morning.
Second, do you have any closing thoughts for the audience today? Something that, a nugget you want to take them from here?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I don't know if you're trimming this podcast or not. We covered so much. This is like, this would be like 15 podcasts in one, truly. I think the overarching theme is know your value system and have the signals in place. And that could be how you feel things, how things occur to you, when you want to react versus respond. Like there's so many different ways to do that. And look for the patterns and themes in that and ask yourself, am I proud of how I'm showing up? Is this how I want to show up? And how is that serving me?
How can they find you? How can our audience find you?
I'm very shy. It's hard to find me. AvenueTalentPartners.com is one of the ways. I am on LinkedIn, Amy Volas. I used to be on Twitter. I sort of backed off of that. I'm like, yeah. So, X. Sorry, it's not Twitter anymore. Those are the two gateways, the easiest way. I'm super responsive. Or ask you. You know how to find me.
True. But I've been sworn to secrecy. So, true. Thank you so much for coming on today. Loved the conversation. Can't wait till the next time.
Thank you. I love it too. And thanks for being a gem that I feel safe to talk about all this stuff with. I hope this is helpful or productive or a different perspective to consider for anybody that joined us on an hour and a half conversation. Thank you. We appreciate your time.